28th annual Tribal Writers Retreat. We're going on 3 decades. As Sarah has said, and many have said before, Oak Lake is the first of its kind, the first tribal writers society of its kind, focusing specifically on the Dakota, Nakota, and Lakota writing traditions. Each year we pick a mentor. This year it's Joseph Marshall III, who will be speaking shortly once we figure out all the technical information. Joseph Marshall III was actually a mentor in the past as well. I wasn't a member of the society at that particular moment in time, but nonetheless, it was the theme for that year.
I think I'm, hold on.
And as you can see on this particular slide, we have sponsors for this year's Writers Retreat. It's all online. This is the first time we've done it online. I think it's actually the first time we've also not had the retreat at Oak Lake itself. The sponsors this year are First Nations Development Institute, Indian Collective. We have IFAIR, which is the Institute for American Indian Research, and the UNM Department of English and Literature. For those of you who want to know more about Oak Lake Writers Society and what we do, there's the website. It's just oaklakeWritersSociety.com, and our email. If you have questions tonight relating to the talk, you can also send an email or post in the comments, and we'll try to get to them. We're also on Facebook and Twitter. And also there we had a 12-part series called Native Reads that Dr. Sarah Hernandez helped put together, which was a selection of 10 books that best represent the Oceti-Sakowin writing tradition. We did feature Joseph Marshall and the Lakota Way on one of those podcasts, but you can kind of get a good idea of what Oak Lake is about, the kind of work that we promote, and some of the writers who are part of the Oceti-Sakowin literary traditions. And to give you an idea of how popular Lakota and Dakota writers are, I ask each and every one of you to think of a famous person from South Dakota who's not Native that you know. And I doubt you will find very many people who on that list. But if you think of all the famous Native people that come from South Dakota, there are quite a few. So that's the kind of work that we promote. And our tribal writers are known worldwide, such as Joseph Marshall, but also in that tradition we have people such as the Delorias, going back to Ella Deloria, Vine Deloria, even to contemporary writers such as Phil Deloria. So like several generations, this is the kind of work that we're working on. Is it working, Tashi?
It will be, just a second. Okay. We're going to go back to the headset and computer with no video, Joe. When you're ready, when Nick is ready to hand it back over, you have a presentation anyway. I'll try to run that for you. And we'll just have you turn off your camera and turn back on your microphone on your computer. We'll try that. I'm kind of laughing though, because I don't know how many of you have read some of Joe's work on, I think, fortitude, bravery, courage. Yeah, this is sort of funny.
Okay,
Hey,
can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, cool. It was a long way around, but I think hopefully we solved it. There it is. Okay, well, let's just pick up from here and get to the point for the presentation this evening. Again, my apologies for being a technological klutz. I can't seem to figure out this technology, but in any case, I decided to talk about, the question that we all face every now and then: what do I write about? And it's not a giant obstacle, but it can be an obstacle nonetheless. So next slide, please. I've yet to meet any Indigenous writer who didn't know what he or she wanted to write about. And we all have an issue, a topic that, it's, that is important to us. And some of us feel very passionate about, some event, some person, some aspect of history, some aspect of our culture that we want the world to know about. And I've never had the problem of, figuring out what to write about. It just, for me, it was a matter of picking out what topic or what issue to focus on. And rarely have I ever experienced the whole thing about writer's block. I've always been able to find a word somehow. And if there was any kind of block for me, it was because I was choosing about what to write. Next slide. So, there's a variety of topics. We can be as specific or as general as we want, but these are the things that came to mind when I was thinking about doing this presentation, and you can see them on the screen, hopefully. And these are the issues that are here in front of us now. Some of them are new. Some of them have always been here as part of our contemporary situation or as part of our historical situation. And right now, there are some things that are in the forefront of the news, of our thinking, of what's going on with us on the reservation or in the urban setting. And the one that comes to mind immediately is missing and murdered Indigenous women. That has come to the forefront. And as a matter of fact, I'm writing a novel now about that, with that topic as a backdrop. And of course, the pandemic. Something that we've been all struggling with for over a year now, and the effect that it's had. So you can go down this list and see that there are issues, there are events, there are situations, there are circumstances that are part and parcel of our lives as natives, whether we're part of an urban community or whether we live on a reservation. And there's probably more. There certainly is more than what's here on the screen. But each one of these are critical. They're important. The world needs to know what is happening with these issues, with these topics. They need to know how we're handling or not handling them. And we certainly need to inform each other what's going on. And so, as the heading indicates, the list is long, a lot longer than what you see on the screen. Next slide. I had a hard time learning how to read, but once I did, I became a really avid reader. And a lot of things, I like to read novels. And I used to buy magazines about the Old West. And I found out that the attitude and the mindset about us as Native people was less than complimentary, to put it mildly. And as a young person, those labels that I saw in writing were not pleasant, and they hurt my feelings. They confused me. And you know what the labels are, and some of them are like, we're nothing but obstacles. We're uncivilized. we're savage, we're dirty, we're dumb, we're bloodthirsty, we're drunkards, and there's some that are you know, a lot worse than that. On the other end of the spectrum, you know, either the Indian is the native person is down and out, or he's on the other end of the spectrum, which is highly romanticized. And one of the things that we've all encountered is the noble savage, the one who is akin to a god, the one who hugs the trees, who lives in harmony with nature, and so on and so forth. So these are the kinds of perceptions that I saw on a part of non-native writers, and the basic reaction, my basic reaction to it was, first it was hurt, and then confusion and anger. I think one of the images that for me represents the mindset of the non-native mainstream is the statue and image of something called the end of the trail, and that's in the next slide. I know that you've all seen this in one form or another, and to me, I don't like it. Not because it's not a good work of art. It is a great work of art on that level, but it, because of what it represents. To me, it represents a defeated native, and that's the perception that is very common in the mainstream culture. That we are conquered, we are defeated, we are downtrodden, and this image to me represents that. And so for that reason, I do not like this image at all. And you know, I work hard to try to circumvent those attitudes, and to let people know that there is another side to us as historical figures, as contemporary people. And I you know, this is just one of my pet peeves. Next slide. When I was in high school, I went to a rummage sale with a friend of mine, and I happened to find a book, and the name of the author was Standing Bear. So I bought the book for like 25 cents, I think. And I didn't read it right away, but eventually I did read it, and it was amazing. This was a person, and then I found out when he wrote it, in the 1920s, and that was even more amazing. For someone from his background and experience to have the courage and the ability to say the things that he did and write very passionately about who he was and where he came from, and about his kind of people. And again, that was an accidental discovery, but I'm glad I did. And of course, later on, with everybody else, became a fan of Vine Deloria Jr. and then all the other people, all the other writers that were from my neck of the woods. One of the first ones I ever read of Virginia Driving-Hawk, and of course later on Elizabeth Cook Lynn. And what was amazing to me was that they were talking about things, realities regarding what was then called Indian life in Indian country, and they were offering viewpoints and articulating viewpoints that were new to me. Not new to me in the sense that I hadn't heard them or I didn't know about them, but that I was seeing them in writing, and that was an empowering moment for me when I realized these things, these words, these perspectives, these feelings were put down in the book, and it was a very encouraging and empowering thing for me, and it really had a role in my deciding to become a writer. Next slide. But the only shortcoming was that those writers couldn't talk about everything. One, because our lives, our situations are so multi-layered and complex that no one person can talk about them all. Some of them tried, and some of them wrote about a lot of issues like Vine Deloria. And he brought all those issues to the forefront, at least to the people who picked up his books and he read them. So then we need, as Native writers now, today, to continue what Standing Bear, what Vine Deloria, and all the others that were in the beginning, we need to continue what they were doing. The perspectives are still there, the experiences are still there, the events are still there, the issues are still there, and we all have our own take on those issues and those perspectives and those things, so that we need to put them out there. So that is our obligation as Native writers. It doesn't matter what we do, how we do it, no matter what genre, whether we novelize an issue, whether we do it in nonfiction, in nonfiction work, whether we do it in an epic poem, it doesn't matter, as long as we put those that out there for the world to learn. Next slide. And I think there's some things that we need to be aware of, some kind of difficult factors, if you would, as Native writers. The preponderance, the most of the writing about us or on Native issues is by non-Native writers. And, you know, way back when, somebody would pick, you know, something Native to write about or mention us in a book or an article or whatever. But it was not always true or flattering. But one of the things that I like to point out is the Greasy Gas Battle, or the Battle of the Little Bighorn of 1876. And believe it or not, it is the subject of over 8,000 books, films, and documentaries and movies. 8,000 and counting. But most of those are by non-Native writers. Less than 100 by my last count, by, you know, when I was still doing research about it. So, you know, they're ahead of us in the sense that, as far as the numbers game is concerned, there are more of them, for one thing. But, you know, most of them have been, most of the books, articles, papers, whatever, are by non-Native writers. And some of those non-Native writers are sympathetic. I mean, I'll give them that. I mean, there are some of those who are our supporters. They sympathize with us. But no matter how hard they try, no matter how much they interview Native people or talk to, you know, or learn about Native issues, they will never ever have the insider's viewpoint unless you've been there and done it. And I mean, it's as simple as that. And one of the things that I learned is something as simple as a title can be misleading, and there are implications all over the board when you see a title like The Last of the Mohicans. I'm sure that all of you, or some of you, or most of you, have seen the most recent movie that was done in 93, 94, The Last of the Mohicans. And it's based on a novel that was published in the 1800s. And the title itself is, you know, implies that there are no more Mohicans. And I think I read a news story somewhere that when the movie came out in 92, 93, or whenever it came out, some Mohican people had a news conference to assure the world that they were still there. And of course, you know, there's another one called The Last Days of the Sioux Nation. And this was a nonfiction book written by a white historian. And when I first saw the title, and I know the man who wrote it, when I first saw the title, you know, my first reaction was, well, I mean, what's going on here? We're still here. And the title would have you believe otherwise. And one of my pet peeves, not so much the title, is the content, is The Oregon Trail by Francis Parkman. If you haven't had a chance to read it, at least take the opportunity to skim through it and read it. It's a representation of the racial perceptions of natives in the 1800s. It's a book about his travels in the West, and he completely editorializes about his attitudes toward and about natives. And the other thing is that history is and can be and is altered when even textbooks sort of put a spin on things that we know to be otherwise. And one of the things I ran across recently was that a textbook was talking about, and it didn't talk about it very long, the space donated to this tragic event was very small in this textbook. And it was talking about the Trail of Tears. And we all know, basically, well, at least a lot of us know, about the Trail of Tears and the devastating effect it had on the Cherokee and Choctaw and other people. People died. It was not easy. It was horrific. But this textbook labeled it as a voluntary migration. So there was always that danger as well, that whoever the writer is, especially in the case of non-native writers who are very conservative and who want to whitewash history, do these kind of things. So these are the kind of things that we should be aware of as native writers. Next slide. So as a writer, as an Indigenous writer, no matter what your tribe is, what do you write about? Well, we saw the list. Anything and everything you want to write about in Indian country is your choice. But follow your instinct and your passion, and be honest about how you approach it. And remember that no one has your exact viewpoint or perspective. We all put a different spin on the same thing. It's like the European story of the 6 blind men and the elephant there. The perception of the elephant was different depending on where they were touching it and what they were perceiving. So your perspective is different than mine. That doesn't mean it is any less important, and we need it. So whatever your perception is, whatever your perspective is, such as on the pipeline protests or boarding schools or any other issue, MMIW, we need to hear that, because there's any more than one way to look at anything. But please be aware that you're not speaking for everyone. As a Lakota writer, you're not speaking for all the Lakota people. You are offering your perspective, as I said earlier. You're putting your particular spin on it, and that's what's important. It's not important that you're representing everybody, because you're not. I don't see myself as representing the entire Lakota perspective. There's too many of them to say there's one, but I have my own, and that's what I put out there. Next slide. Honesty is important, and it occurs in 2 ways. If we're writing nonfiction, then we tell it like it is. Nonfiction is essentially reporting. It's very close to journalism in my book. And if you want to write something nonfiction, then you represent the facts as you uncover them. And that's the limit of nonfiction, unfortunately. If there's a bit of information that you can't uncover, that's not available, you don't fill in the holes. That's not what nonfiction is about, and that's being honest. It entails a lot of research. If our stories are culture-based, then we stay true to that culture, that history, that philosophy, and everything about where we're coming from and what we're writing about. We don't invent things. That's what other writers do, but we don't. Unless we're writing some fantasy or something, and then we're gonna have to be honest about that too. But if our stories are culture based, we stay true to that culture. Next slide. Oh, that's it. So I think we probably have a few minutes for any comments or questions or objections. If you have any, I'd be glad to entertain that as well.
Thank you so much, Joseph, for that wonderful presentation. I think it was a great overview of sort of the mechanics or the basics of writing. We do have a couple of questions. The first comes from Angelica Dolores Villegas on Facebook. And she asks, what are your thoughts on Native history being taught in schools? In Washington state schools, schools are required to share our perspective of history, but what we are seeing is that the schools want the culture aspect, but not the hard truths. And what do we do when these systems only want the tokenized Indian to sing a song and share a dance? Is this okay?
No, no, emphatically no. If any school is going to include in their curriculum Native history, then that's what it should be. If it's going to be a course on Native culture, that's a whole nother arena. But history is history, and not all of it is pleasant, to say the least. And while superficially it may be, good to say, well, we're teaching history. If you're going to take that step, then go all the way, teach the truth, and not a whitewash version of history, but all perspectives of history. There's and for that you need to go to the source. You need to go to the people whose history you're talking about, and get their input, because I read too many books or heard too many statements where the Battle of the Little Big, or the victory at the Battle of the Little Bighorn, was attributed to the fact that there were 4,000 Lakota and Cheyenne warriors and only 600 cavalry soldiers. When the truth is there were maybe 800 to 1,000, if that, warriors. So the real version of history is a lot different than what we've been seeing. So if you're going to teach history. Not, sharing culture is not having someone come in and sing a song and say, there, I've done my part. Have a Native person talk about some aspect of their culture, and share it from the source, not from a secondary source.
Thanks for that. So the next question comes from Laniko Lee, who has been a longtime member and a founding member of the Oak Lake Writers Society. And she asks, what are your thoughts on novels such as Winter Count by David Whiten, or They're There by Tommy Orange, novels written by urban Indians reflecting on life on the res?
Well, generally speaking, I think that anybody who writes, especially novels, and purports to represent a certain situation or viewpoint, has to learn everything they can about it, and has to have some kind of experience along the lines that he's talking about or she is talking about. And that may sound a little extreme for some people, but I would no more write a novel about being a spaceman because I've never experienced it, about being an astronaut because I've never experienced it. I can do all the research in the world, but I will never have that particular insider's viewpoint. That being said, generally speaking, though, if you're a Native person and you want to write about some aspect of Native culture or Native experience, whether it's res or urban, that's fine with me, as long as you do your best to represent the perspective that you're writing about.
Thanks for that. So the next question comes from Courtney Clausen, who asks, do you have any recommendations for writing resources specific to Indigenous writers?
Writing resources. No, I don't quite understand the question, but writing resources for Indigenous writers, probably other Native writers, and that's, to me, that's the obvious choice. There are more and more of us all the time who've the experience of publishing a book or having done the research and written about it. So we know a little bit about what happens in the process, and as it relates especially to Native writers and how Native writers are perceived by publishers and so forth. So I would think that other Native writers is probably your best resource.
And the correct answer is Oak Lake Writers Society.
Of course. Absolutely.
The next one comes from Lisa Makpiaska. As a nonfiction Dakota perspective on reclaiming food sovereignty, our sources are many ancestors. How do we credit community knowledge?
As specifically as you can. In a couple of my books, I've relied on stories I've heard from elders, some of who were at that point already passed, but I knew who they were. I remember how I received the information from them. So I actually put their names and what they told me. So list those resources as specifically as you know, who they were, where they live, what their experience was, if you can.
All right, I think I'm going to ask any of the Oak Lake writers who are in the Zoom call, if you have any questions, you can just take yourself off mute or raise your hand. Before I have a question, so I'm putting that off towards last. But if there are any Oak Lake writers who are on this call who have any questions, just trying to see if there's a raise of hands. You can message Oak Lake Writers Society to be unmuted, so you can pose your question directly. Okay, so I have a question. I'm not sure if you've read Pekka Haimalainen's Lakota America, but it really represents a kind of growing theme within contemporary history or historiography on writing about Indigenous nations historically, specifically kind of creating this, I guess the closest it would come to would be like a cultural relativism, to say that not only was the United States an empire, behaved like an empire, which expanded westward, committed genocide, enslaved African Americans, but so too did Lakota people. He wrote a book called Comanche Empire, making these kind of comparisons.
Right.
And I just wanted, I don't know if you've read the book or not, but I was wondering if you can maybe give some, a little bit of a reflection on that kind of framing, and if it adequately reflects Lakota worldviews, especially historically, and how they developed over time, and how we encountered not only the United States, but other nations. And whether or not, there are models beyond your own work that you read in terms of how to write Indigenous history specifically.
I haven't read the book. People have asked me about it, but I haven't had the time yet to read it. In fact, somebody sent me a copy, but I haven't opened it yet. So I can't comment specifically on the book itself. But the one thing that I've, as an observer as somewhat of a historian, there's one habit that most people have throughout history, throughout the world, is that we look for similarities in other people. In other words, if we behave this way, surely other people behave as we do. And that is a big stumbling block, because it creates problems, it creates misconceptions and misperceptions. And one case in point is the Lewis and Clark experience when they were traveling up the Missouri River, and they were looking for a head man or somebody who was an overall authority over a particular band or group, just as they were in the American society. The assumption was made that we were like them in that respect, and of course we were not. So that's the biggest stumbling block that I see in making those kind of comparisons. And the comparisons lead to assumptions. The people talk about human nature, but I think it's even more specific than that. We all, because of our cultural values, cultural norms, going way back when, there are our nature is dependent on what we are specifically and ethnically and racially and nationally. There is not one, generally speaking, human nature. One size doesn't fit all. And anytime we look at other people and look for similarities so we can decide to like them or not, then that's our first mistake. And we were not empirical the way the United States was, the way European countries were. Certainly we controlled a large territory, but that was because there were more of us than there were of other tribes. We were, we eventually numbered in around 20,000 in the mid 1800s. And that was, one of the larger tribes in the area. With those kind of numbers, of course, we could control a larger territory. Did that mean that we went out and conquered village after village and laid waste to people's lives? No, we didn't do that. And one thing that happened in the action between indigenous groups was that we were smart enough to realize if there was a group coming, there were more of them, and they had more bows and arrows and more warriors, we slipped away to avoid confrontation. And there is no overwhelming archaeological evidence to suggest otherwise. Whereas in Europe, there's all kind of conflict and the whole thing of empirical Vikings and all those kinds. That's very true, but that mindset didn't really exist here in pre-European Turtle Island. So that's some comparisons are just a mistake to make.
So we have another question from Laniko, and it says, or she asks, I was asked whether Crazy Horse had white ethnicity due to his physical characteristics, and was this why he was reticent to belong within his community? That he earned his place because he was physically different. What do you make of this?
I would laugh, but that would not be polite. No, he didn't have any kind of white ethnicity that I was able to determine. Certainly, he had lighter skin, and his hair was lighter. All the stories point to that. We don't really have any kind of hard image of him in any photographs. Certainly, there are no photographs of him, but there are physical descriptions that describe him as being somewhat tall. I don't know what that means, somewhat tall, but slender, had a long, narrow face, a long nose and a wide mouth, and very intense dark eyes. So he didn't have blue eyes, he didn't have gray eyes, he had lighter hair, but there is a physiological condition that's about 2 or 3 steps down from albinism, and it shows up especially in dark-skinned people, where their skin is lighter than even a brother and sister, but because their skin is noticeably lighter, they stand out just by their appearance. And that was, I think, probably the case with Crazy Horse. I've read novels, I've read papers, I've read articles about people who said the only way Crazy Horse could be Crazy Horse was because he was white. And the white part of him gave him the initiative, the ingenuity, the drive to do what he did. And that's not the case. He was Lakota, he was Minikaju on one side and Oglala on the other side, pure and simple.
So the next question comes from Chris Bordeaux. He asks, what are your thoughts about urban Indians being seen as the experts on their views of the res when their only experience is spending summers on the res when they were growing up, especially those that are professors in universities and teach their interpretations?
I would no more label myself an expert on urban Indian life simply because I haven't lived an urban life the way some people have. I've lived in a city, but not for very long. I've never been a part of an urban Indian community for an extended length of time. So I don't have that experience. I don't have the insight that comes from experience. So I would never represent myself as an expert on urban Indian life, simply because I haven't been there and done that. And I don't think there are any experts in this world. We're all knowledgeable about something, some more than others. But I'm leery of anybody who allows themselves to be labeled as experts or label themselves as experts. That's my answer.
Well, we have, do we have any more questions from Facebook or Zoom? I've asked all of the ones in the chats so
Nick, I
far.
think sometimes it's not updating. We had somebody
Okay.
ask if he could comment about teepee rings. That was one question. I think it's referring to the archaeological. So if you want to talk about that. And then there was a question about books.
Teepee rings? All I know about teepee rings is that the ones I heard about occurred predominantly in Wyoming. And teepee rings, as I learned about them, were just a circle of stones left in a particular place. And the assumption was made that those stones were there because people camped there, and those stones were used to weigh down the edges of a teepee. And that's probably true, given some stories that I've heard. But that would mean that those people were moving and moving rapidly, and it was simply an overnight camp. And instead of pounding pegs into the ground, which sometimes was not easy to do, they just weighted down the edges of the teepee with stones. And that's, as far as I know, how why teepee rings are there.
I think I have a question. Joe, I was wondering, you make the case for really recognizing Lakota identity in your new book, Crazy Horse Weeps.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a fantastic read. I felt like you maybe said some things you've been holding on to for a while, and I appreciated it. So my question is sort of two parts. And it's kind of the urban Indian. I don't think I'm an urban Indian. I'm a mostly off res, though I was born on the res Indian.
Mhm.
I don't know if anybody in South Dakota is urban anything, is my
Right,
point.
right.
And I mean, I've lived in other states, but never the urban experience like people think of. So I guess my question really is, being somebody who, you know, moved around a lot as an adult, trying to, you know, live, you know, within reservation communities, whether it was, you know, my ex-husband's community or my own, we have housing shortages. You speak a lot about, you know, learning more about our language, speaking our language. What are some of the things that are suitable? I mean, I really agree with what you're saying, and Chris, about none of us want to become the token Indians of anything,
Right.
or, you know, put ourselves up as experts. But how do we go about making a better understanding of our language, especially people who maybe haven't had access to a group like Oak Lake Writers Society? And then the other part being, what about those of us who are also have been enveloped in various Christian denominations? So it's kind of a two-part question. How do we do the cultural things we should be doing? But also, as far as Christianity, which you speak to in your new book, I thought maybe there is maybe some. I really liked what you said, I guess, about realizing that Lakota identity and being a cultural Christian basically are at odds. And so I think for myself, it's more of a philosophy or spiritual, something like that. But, you know, we have our cemeteries are run by churches.
Mhm.
We have to
Right.
deal with the church in so many ways, a couple different denominations, and maybe even more worrisome. And Nick and I have talked about this before. There's a lot of language I hear amongst some traditionals that come out of like the more conservative evangelical or Catholic communities that are sort of like on the Christian radio circuit, you know?
Mhm.
And so sometimes I feel like it's also really confusing, and it also becomes confusing. So bringing it all together, it also becomes confusing as a woman,
Mhm.
because to speak our female dialect, but also be in public, and also, so that's kind of a mess to leave you with. But if you could comment on any of that, I would appreciate it.
Well, the one thing I did say that is that identity is our last stronghold, and we're losing it. Most of us, if we were to be honest, our lifestyle is more non-native than it is native of any kind. And the first indicator is the use of language. Way back in the ancient times of 1971, there were people who came here to Todd County and did a language assessment survey, and they had a scale that they worked with where they were interviewing households, Lakota households, and to determine the extent of native language use in a given home. And the scale was at the top, mostly Lakota or partially Lakota or only Lakota, partially Lakota, and both English and Lakota, and partially English and mostly English on downside of it. And in 1971, there was still a significant amount of traditional households, especially in 2 or 3 communities, where they came in on a high end of the scale, where Lakota was either mostly spoken or only spoken in the home. That's not the case now. And so what happens there is that we have given way to a different kind of identity, and we've yielded to all the things that every other society on this planet has yielded to, all the technology, all the movies, everything else that represents modern society, and which is okay, but it's fine if that's what you want to do. But in the process, as Indigenous people, we're losing our connection to our own Indigenous community and our own Indigenous culture and identity. And we have to be blatantly honest with ourselves about that, because at the rate we're going, within the next 10 to 20 years, 20 to 30 years, I should say, there may be no more Lakota language, because some surveys are suggesting that less than 3%, if that, are first language speakers. And they're all in my age range, from 70 on up. And once we're gone, and and our numbers are not replaced by people who've learned the language, then our language is in danger of becoming extinct. And if we lose the language, we lose the best connection to our culture, the best connection to our Lakota identity. And since you bring up the Christianity, and it's what one of the things I talk about in my book, is that Christianity was, primarily responsible for the loss of language, along with the government, by forbidding our ancestors to speak. And you all know the story of forbidding our ancestors to speak our languages. And so they are directly responsible. The fault can be laid right at their feet. And not only that, not only with language, but they attacked our own spiritual beliefs, our spiritual practice, and our rituals, and even made laws and regulations to forbid them. And those of us who are aware of history know that. And probably are ways to circumvent that, short of kicking all the Christians off the res or out of our lives, or making sure that every new generation takes Lakota language classes. We might have to do that, but in order to teach that, we have to make sure that everybody's in agreement with that. That's what we need to do. People who have assimilated don't necessarily want to shed their non-native identity, their non-native persona. That's a hard thing to do. And it's one thing I've learned to my dismay, that it's okay. I'm if I don't speak Lakota, that's fine. That's no skin off anybody else's nose. Well, generally speaking, it's we're losing our culture, we're losing our identity, I should say, and we have to take drastic steps. Even though that happened gradually over 3 or 4 generations, we are now in a position, we are sort of in a box in the corner where we have to take drastic steps to circumvent it. And that means individually, for those of us who care and want to go out and teach Lakota to someone else, and those who want to learn it. It sounds drastic, it sounds hard, but it has to be done if there's going to be enough of a resurgence with the language. So that's as an old dude, I have some really hard and fast attitudes regarding what we should do, and that's one of them. And as far as Christianity is concerned, I've noticed that the attendance in some of the churches, the Catholic churches, the Episcopal churches, by Native people has been waning for decades, and not as much Native people are part of the congregations, although some still are. And again, it's a matter of choice. But I hope that one is going to make a choice to help ensure that our culture persists, that it goes on for one more generation. And if we have to take drastic steps, short of a revolution, that's what we need to do.
Thanks so much. So if you're just joining us, we're doing a question and answer with Joseph Marshall. If you would like to ask a question and you're listening to the live stream or watching the live stream, you can put it in the chat box. We have 2 more questions. Well, 2.5, I should say. The first comes from Jessica Garcia Fritz. And they write, can you offer any advice on pushing back against certain disciplinary language that promotes Eurocentric views? In architecture, for example, extractive practices are referred to as Western expansion. Any advice on dismantling these perceptions?
Simply just to counterpoint it. There's like the change of Horny Peak to Black Elk Peak. Those kind of things need to happen to help people understand that there was something here before the coming of Euro-Americans and the Europeans. And there was a whole, there were any number of dozens, hundreds of vibrant cultures that were thriving on this land. And to overshadow that with the way history is taught is diminishing, our story. But the only thing we can do is to counterpoint and make sure that names are changed or something along those lines happened. There's another viewpoint. We just have to do it. We can't just allow it to go on and say, well, that's okay. We need to say, well, yeah, on the other hand, this is what happened here. There's always the other side of the story, and our side of the story is obviously different. Our names are different for certain landmarks. I referred to what's now the White River as Makaska at one point, and that's what the Lakota called it, which is a White Earth River, and that was the original name for it. That was our name for it. Somebody might have called it something else before then, but that was our name for it. And those are the kind of things we need to do. It may not seem like giant steps, but there's steps that still need to be taken. And really, it can be an effective tool if we take the time and the energy to confront those kind of issues.
The next question comes from Leniko again, who asks, how do tribal schools that are operated predominantly by white educators establish our tribal cultural presence? And she also asked if you had any resources on bilingual texts, that could possibly be written in Lakota and English.
What was the first question?
How do tribal schools that are operated predominantly by white educators establish our tribal cultural presence?
As I said before, by going to the source, by including, inviting in people who are knowledgeable about Native people who are knowledgeable about history and culture, and use them as a resource, and to actually teach if necessary. That's the simplest approach that I can see, and it's it's better than training somebody about Indian issues or Indian history. And as far as bilingual texts, I'm not aware of any. I think that it's something that we probably need to look at. But on the other hand, it may be one of those steps that are difficult to do, but nonetheless we need to do it. There are Albert Whitehat's book and program on learning Lakota language is one of those things I would recommend. Having a bilingual text means that you're teaching the language actively and at a rate that ensures that there are enough students who are learning it quickly enough, or that there is an audience for it. So I don't know which perspective she's coming from, but it's certainly something that we as a Lakota, as Indigenous writers and educators should consider is that very thing. But I'm not aware of anything, and nothing comes to mind at the moment.
And we have another question from Facebook. I think we are going to close out the conversation at the top of the hour, if that's okay with you, Joseph.
That's fine.
Okay. So Devin Sioux from Facebook asks, What do you consider a respectful way for a biracial native to state identity and positionality in their work?
A biracial native. Well, it depends on which of those parts of yourself that you claim, and which of those parts of yourself that you identify with. I don't know this person, so we're all of us, a lot of us anyway, are part Washichu in one way or another. If the mathematics are correct, I'm 1/8, and my siblings and I are 1/8 French. But I've never really wanted to connect with the French ancestry part, although I know about it. I know about my French ancestries, the French great-grandfather, and how the French blood was infused into my family on the paternal side. But that doesn't make me want to be French. The identity was influenced by how I grew up as a Lakota person, and it overwhelms the other. So it all depends on, I think, which of those parts that this individual identifies with the most. And there's certainly nothing wrong with acknowledging both at all. I mean, one has to be honest with oneself. And if you are going to be both, then that's fine, as long as you're aware as much as you possible that you can be. Being part Native, there was a time when that was kind of frowned upon. It was not well received. That's where the term Ieska came from, partially. Ieska means speaks white. It was a derogatory term. To some people it still is, but not so much anymore, I don't think. But it's all a matter of what we identify with. And what we feel, what we're passionate about, what we feel about ourselves.
I have a final kind of question, and considering. Oh, so Devin just responded and said, "They're proud Cherokee woman decolonizing the South, and Wado for this dialogue."
Great.
The final question I have is there's it's hard to start as a writer. Where does one begin?
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess it's more of a general question of what advice do you have for up and coming Native writers? And what do you wish you would have known before you became a writer that you know now?
Well, that's a 4-hour conversation right there. I wish I knew more about the business side of writing. I wish I knew more about the business side of writing when I first started, because I stumbled around a bit with that aspect of it. Creatively, I went to writing workshops. I learned the art of writing as much as I could. So that part was never an issue for me. I'm still trying to become a better writer. So the creative part was okay, but it was the business part, the other half of the writing experience that I didn't know anything about. And when it came time to standing there with a manuscript in my hand, looking around, okay, what do I do now? I didn't know where to turn. But the first thing one needs to do is join a group of writers like Oak Lake writers, so that you have access to someone else's experience and information. And that's a big step in the right direction. And if you're going to do anything seriously, think about a literary agent, because these days it's hard to get your work out in front of a publisher without an agent. Some of them will, tell you, we only accept submissions from agents, and that's the mantra that's out there. So that's the basic piece of advice I would give is to find yourself an agent, and you don't pay anything up front with an agent. You simply sign an agreement or a contract. that they will represent your work, and they will put it in front of publishers that are suitable to your work. And be aware that it is a business, and the publisher is going to come back at you with all kinds of terms and conditions, and expect you to sign on the dotted line. And whether you do that or not is totally up to you. But the bulk of the money that is going to be earned from your book is going to go to the publisher. That's the grim reality of business these days. And unless you're self-published, unless you take another avenue, that's how it goes. But find yourself a good agent.
Thanks for that. I guess another aspect of this would be getting more Native people and kind of the higher echelons into these so-called gatekeeper statuses
Right.
as well. I know there's been kind of a renaissance in Black writing and fiction, nonfiction, and all genres, where you have Black literary agents, Black editors who are doing this kinds of thing.
Right.
So it's due time that we do have Native people at that level as well. So it is good perspective too, and having published on that and seeing that other side of it is something you're not trained to see. And
that's right.
Especially your expectations and the things that you should ask for.
Right, exactly. And it would be cool to have Native publishers.
Absolutely.
That would be the ultimate. That would be no guarantee that your work is going to be published just because you're Native, but at least you'd have probably a better chance of getting your work given serious consideration.
Exactly. Well, I do want to thank you so much for sharing your time. I think this was a really enlightening dialogue, especially for those of you who are interested in writing, and even more so for those of you who are interested in tribal writing and what the work of the Oak Lake Writers Society does. So I just want to say, give you a virtual thank you, a virtual Wopila for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us.
My
this
pleasure.
evening.
My pleasure entirely.
You can follow the work of the Oak Lake Writers Society on Facebook and Twitter. We will be back on Saturday night with a live reading. So we'll be posting updates on our social media accounts for those of you who are interested in joining us. We do thank you for taking the time and practicing patience with us as we are figuring out the tech side. But I just want to say, give another thank you again to our esteemed guest, Joseph Marshall III, whose book, Crazy Horse Weeps, is published in 2019. Please check it out. Please check out all of his books. I'm a big fan myself, and a lot of us in Indian country are, and especially in Lakota country, very proud of him. So thanks so much for joining us this evening. Tashi, is there anything else that you want to add, or Sarah that you want to add before we call it a night?
I don't think so. I think this was really good. Thank you so much for everyone who came, and for Joe and for working through our technical. So I appreciate that.
Right.
And yeah, I'm looking forward to the rest of this retreat and seeing everybody back on Saturday.
Have a good night, everyone.
Good
Take
night.
care.
Right.